Chapter 549 Opening, Phantoms in the Sky. Plant-type soul beasts' intelligence was activated more slowly than animal soul beasts. They could only be considered intelligent after they had 100,000 years of cultivation. Huo didn't go near, because he was afraid that he would startle this large flower. He was a human after all, and soul beasts were very sensitive towards humans. Huo's benevolent spiritual power circled over as he conveyed his emotions to that datura flower and inquired patiently. The datura flower told him that its pollen had sensed the blue silver emperor at a valley not far from this place. Huo's spiritual power could almost cover 50 kilometers. He quickly found that valley. He hadn't discovered anything different about that place, but under the datura flower's guidance, he immediately sensed how different the plants in this valley were from the outside world. Huo's spiritual power could reach 50 kilometers in diameter because of these plants, but there weren't plants in every single corner within this range. He couldn't feel any spiritual tentacles in places where there were no plants, so he couldn't get their help from those areas. But when he inspected that valley closely, he noticed that there were many plants growing in this valley. However, not a single plant released their spiritual tentacles to merge with his. Seems like that must be the place. Huo could feel himself getting excited. They had been searching for so long, and they had announced so many bounties over the past 2 years, while they had increased the rewards more than once. Even then, they couldn't find the blue silver emperor at all. He hadn't expected to find a clue in this place. He was just about to stand up and proceed towards that valley to search when he sensed something, and lay back down in the thicket. He was using imitation, and he was just like a bush himself, as he didn't release any part of his aura at all. Huo widened his eyes in surprise. Damn, the Sun Moon Empire is worried after all. Beyond the horizon at the limits of his senses, Huo could feel a large mass of aerial surveillance soul tools flying towards Heavenly Sea City. There were aerial surveillance soul tools both high in the sky and closer to the ground, and some were only 500 meters above the ground. He didn't use spiritual detection to detect them directly because they were too far away, so he could only observe them through the plants around them. Huo noticed several dozen surveillance soul tools that were extremely close to the ground roaming around by observing everything, and many silhouettes surged high across the sky at the same time. Seems like my judgment is correct. The Sun Moon Empire is concentrating their stronger forces to eradicate us. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Huo's mouth. Two pieces of good news had appeared one after another. How could he not be happy? He had to take a rain check for that valley, but the valley wasn't about to uproot itself and run away. He would execute his mission first before returning to search for the blue silver emperor. Huo was just lying there quietly, and it didn't take long before those lower surveillance soul tools reached his location and swept past him. Those surveillance soul tools that were responsible for surveillance lower to the ground contained thermal detectors, oscillation detectors, and even spiritual detectors. Even though there were relatively fewer spiritual detectors, there were enough to give Huo a surprise. Has the Sun Moon Empire really understood? Even if they hadn't yet understood, they must have considered problems in that respect, and they've increased their spiritual detection capabilities. How lucky. Those spiritual detectors swept across Huo, but didn't react at all. Their spiritual undulations didn't discover anything out of the ordinary. Of course, Huo wouldn't give them a chance to discover anything. His spiritual aura had become identical to the plants around him, like he was completely assimilated into the thicket. Huo also regulated his body temperature to be identical to everything around him, and his soul power was completely shut off. In addition to imitation, he was just like a shrub. Spiritual detectors wouldn't detect his presence, even if they were just a foot in front of him as long as he didn't move. Those lower surveillance soul tools quickly flew by, and the aerial surveillance soul tools appeared immediately afterwards. Huo didn't have to use spiritual detection to conduct a deep investigation. He could use his own spirit eyes to see those aerial surveillance soul tools very clearly. It didn't take long before he witnessed hundreds of aerial surveillance soul tools spy in the sky above him. They were dispersed as they flew in all directions, and all kinds of surveillance waves covered a tremendous surface area, as they were like an enormous web that blanketed everything around Heavenly Sea City. A faint smile appeared on Huo's face. Go search. You'll never find us. Huo's eyes suddenly froze in this moment. Shadows formed neat lines roughly 1,000 meters in the sky as they flew rapidly in Heavenly Sea City's direction. Dark golden colors flickered on their bodies, and they were still relatively conspicuous as the sun shone on them. Their silhouettes would become especially blurry during nighttime, and the light around them contorted faintly. Huo drew a cold breath at what he saw. A single term appeared in his mind: human-shaped soul tools. Has the Sun Moon Empire really developed human-shaped soul tools? Yes. Those dark golden shadows were soul engineers who were all covered in dark golden armor. How could Huo not tell if that armor was just normal armor or human-shaped soul tools? Yes, those were human-shaped soul tools. Every single human-shaped soul tool was about 3 meters tall, and they were completely covered in dark golden armor. There were 3 pairs of flying-type soul tools outstretched behind their backs as they raced through the air. There were 300 people. 300 people raced above him in an instant, and every single person emanated frightening auras. The location of the eyes on their helmets radiated faint red colors. Light burned around them, and they seemed to assimilate into the air around them. Except, they were in the sky, and they didn't seem like they could find anything to integrate into. Huo swallowed some saliva. What he was most worried about had happened after all. The Sun Moon Empire had finally made a breakthrough in their research into human-shaped soul tools, and their development seemed extremely strong. According to his investigations, the strongest legion in the Sun Moon Empire's hand that protects the nation was the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Legion, and they were formed from 300 soul engineers who were at least soul kings. But when these soul engineers flew over him, how could soul kings compare with their soul power undulations? Not even soul sages could match up to the strength of those soul power undulations. They clearly belonged to Soul Douluo, and that was especially so for the several dozen soul engineers who were flying at the forefront. Every single one had auras that were so deep and profound that they were undoubtedly titled Douluo. Huo had always known that the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was strong, but he didn't expect them to be that powerful. A soul engineer legion like that could reach Heavenly Sea City from Radiant City in less than 4 hours if they flew with their full strength. They quickly flew over Huo's head. Huo stood up quietly and took a deep breath as he gazed in the direction they were flying in. The Sun Moon Empire. This is the Sun Moon Empire's strength. Huo pursed his lips tightly as he forced down the helplessness in his heart. He surged into the sky, and his Class 9 flying type soul tool opened and activated at once. Boom, a dull boom could be heard as Huo's body broke the sound barrier and raced in Radiant City's direction. Time. What he needed most was time. He wanted Radiant City to feel alarmed and fearful, so time was most important for him. He had to complete his mission before the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion returned to Radiant City. It was already afternoon, and evening would come in 2 hours. Huo could reach Radiant City before evening if everything went smoothly. The Imperial Soul Engineer Legion would take some time to search for them, and they would also need about 4 hours for their journey. It was likely that they couldn't return to Radiant City by tonight, and once he started operating inside Radiant City, he trusted that the Sun Moon Empire would find a way to inform the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion and seek their aid. From that moment onwards, he would only have 4 hours. What he could accomplish within those 4 hours was up to his own ability. Huo was resilient and determined. After his initial shock from the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion's formidable equipment, he quickly calmed down as he tried to recall everything he had seen while he surged through the sky. The Sun Moon Empire couldn't possibly have more than 300 Soul Douluo. That was impossible. Not even the Dalu Empire, which had the most soul masters, had so many high-level soul masters. But the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion's soul engineers had auras that were clearly no different from that of a Soul Douluo. This meant that the soul engineer's armor possessed excellent amplification effects, and they were probably Class 8 soul tools. A single Class 8 soul tool wasn't much, but what about 300 of them? What kind of power was that? The Sun Moon Empire had enough power to fight the Holy Ghost Church with just this single soul engineer legion. At least, they would have enough to intimidate and deter them from making any rash moves. But the Sun Moon Empire didn't have what many 8-ringed individuals. So how were they using these Class 8 soul tools? This was a doubt that Huo couldn't wrap his head around. Using soul tools which belonged to higher classes wasn't impossible under normal circumstances, but a single class was the limit. Soul tools with higher classes had more requirements and conditions, and they became increasingly harder for soul engineers of lower what classes to use. Huro Yuao was referring to normal soul masters. Graduates from Shrek Academy almost all possess the ability to use soul tools above their class, and that was due to their stable and consolidated foundations with their cultivation. But what about the Sun Moon Empire? Most of their soul masters relied on medicine or certain auxiliary soul tools to boost their soul power. But what about their foundations? They probably didn't have any foundations, and everything was the result of undue haste. Many soul engineers found it difficult to improve further after obtaining 3 soul rings, not to mention using soul tools above their current class. Only several 3-ring soul engineers using a single class 4 soul tool could be successful. Under such circumstances, if the Imperial Soul Engineering Legion soul engineers were all soul kings, how could they cross 3 classes and use class 8 soul tools that only Soul Douluo could use? Even if the Sun Moon Empire had some way to raise their cultivation to 6-ring soul emperors, they still couldn't use class 8 soul tools. Boosting a soul master's cultivation beyond soul emperor using medicine was futile unless the medicines used were natural treasures. Normal medicine wouldn't be useful at all. Huro Yuao didn't believe that the Sun Moon Empire could forge something like the Kayankan fortune pill. If that was possible, Shu Tianran himself would probably have become an ultimate Douluo a long time ago. These doubts circled in Huro Yuao's mind, and it was clear that he wouldn't find the answer unless he faced the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Legion head to head. All he could do for now was speculate. Facing them head to head? Huro Yuao laughed bitterly as that phrase occurred to him. How were they going to fight? 300 soul engineers who were at least class 8 didn't even need linked soul tools. If they gathered their fire, even the Death God Douluo, Yi Shishui, and the Dragon Emperor Douluo, Wang Xiaya, would have to run away, not to mention himself. If they used linked soul tools and locked onto their target, the destructive force could probably incinerate and vaporize an entire city in the blink of an eye. Such ultimate power hadn't been used on the battlefield yet. It wasn't hard to imagine the outcome if they appeared on the battlefield. Compared to this Soul Engineer Legion, which was fully equipped with human-shaped soul tools, the equipment of Shrek Academy's 3 Soul Engineer Legions was no different from that of a beggar. Huro Yuao felt his heart sink when that thought occurred to him. His good mood because his plan was successful and because he had found the Blue Silver Emperor's whereabouts vanished into thin air. Huro Yuao wanted to maintain prolonged flight, so he kept his speed at the speed of sound. This was the only way that he could fly continuously while expending a lot of soul power. A class 9 soul tool firing at full power could achieve an incredible speed. Huro Yuao could see Radiant City far in front of him after a little over the hour. There were aerial and low altitude surveillance soul tools in the skies above and around Radiant City. The Sun Moon Empire had become even more wealthy after they conquered more than 2/3 of the Heavenly Soul Empire's territory. Over the past 2 years, they had probably used all the wealth and resources that they had obtained from the Heavenly Soul Empire on developing soul tools to reach where they were today. Huro Yuao didn't fly directly into Radiant City. He didn't fully understand Radiant City's soul tools, and could even feel a tinge of fear from the bottom of his heart. He didn't know how advanced the Sun Moon Empire had become with their soul tool technology. That was especially so when he witnessed their successful construction of human-shaped soul tools. Huro Yuao descended to the ground when he was about 25 kilometers from Radiant City. He used imitation and hurried along, and he was a much smaller target on the ground. He used spiritual detection as far as he could to avoid any surveillance soul tools that could discover his traces. Radiant City was a city without walls, but that didn't mean it didn't have strong defenses. On the contrary, Radiant City possessed high-energy compression array soul tools, and the city's offensive and defensive capabilities were the absolute best on the continent. Huro Yuao found an unassuming bush 5 kilometers from Radiant City and stopped. He lay down on the ground and replenished what he had consumed from flying at high speeds while attempting to extend his consciousness once more to feel the plant's spiritual undulations around him. Huro Yuao quickly succeeded following his previous experiment. These plant situations were similar, especially so because Huro Yuao directly released benevolent spiritual undulations and quickly attained their approval. Huro Yuao's spiritual tentacles swiftly merged with those plants' spiritual tentacles as he stretched them out into the distance. This was undoubtedly the safest surveillance method. Huro Yuao risked being discovered by abilities like spiritual barriers if he used spiritual detection for surveillance, but extending his spiritual tentacles through those plants meant there was no way he could be discovered. Radiant City was a city like a forest of metal and steel, but even then, there were quite a few plants within it, and they were evenly distributed throughout the city. Huro Yuao's spiritual power stretched out and quickly entered Radiant City. However, his spiritual power could stretch out with himself at the center when he connected with those plants, though he couldn't project his spiritual power in a single direction. Therefore, he could only reach 25 kilometers in Radiant City's direction. In addition to the 5 kilometers between Radiant City and himself, he could only reach 20 kilometers into Radiant City. 20 kilometers could cover typical cities several times over, but Radiant City was just too large. Huro Yuao was 20 kilometers in, but he couldn't even reach half of Radiant City. But that was sufficient for now. Radiant City's aerial surveillance soul tools were mostly located around the city, but Huro Yuao would be making a grave mistake if he thought this meant that they had fewer surveillance soul tools inside the city. The surveillance soul tools inside Radiant City were all on the ground, and they seamlessly covered every single corner. Radiant City lived up to its reputation after all. Large cities along the southern shores like Heavenly Sea City were a far cry from Radiant City. Huro Yuao's first thought after his spiritual power reached its limit was that Radiant City was impregnable. Yes, Radiant City gave him a feeling that it was impregnable. That was just incredible. A city as large as that could give him a feeling that it was impregnable. That almost made him feel a little abnormal. This wasn't Huro Yuao's first time at Radiant City, and every visit gave him different sensations. There was no doubt that Radiant City had changed a lot over the past 2 years, but one couldn't observe those changes simply by looking with his or her eyes. Only someone who could investigate and observe every inch of the city could discover the city's frightening hidden strength. Perhaps not even the Holy Ghost Church is aware. The corner of Huro Yuao's mouth curved into a mocking smile. If the Death God Douluo, Yi Shishui knew of the strength hidden within Radiant City, who knew how she would feel? Huro Yuao couldn't reach the royal palace from his current position, but he tried his best to stretch his spiritual power ever further. He discovered something that piqued his interest, a high-energy compression array soul tool. Huro Yuao was currently on Radiant City's southern side, and the high-energy compression array soul tool he had discovered was also on Radiant City's southern side. A patch of buildings and structures encircled this high-energy compression array soul tool, and there was also an enormous soul tool front deployed in the area. 150 soul engineers were responsible for guarding it, and Huro Yuao could tell from this soul tool front scale that their offensive and defensive capabilities could probably cover half of Radiant City. Radiant City's 4 corners were probably arranged in similar fashion. Back when the body Douluo had launched a hysterical assault which he had paid for with his life, Shu Tianran had relied on the tremendous soul power stored within these high-energy compression array soul tools and unleashed the largest protective barrier in history to protect himself. Even though those defenses didn't allow him to completely dispel the body Douluo's attack, that was mostly because they were far too scattered. Huro Yuao had witnessed how frightening high-energy compression array soul tools could be from that episode, and the soul power contained within such soul tools was just too vast. It wasn't hard to imagine the kind of explosive fighting strength that a single soul tool front could achieve by relying on even one such soul tool. 4 such high-energy compression soul tools were enough to make Radiant City impregnable. No, not 4. There must be more than 4. Huro Yuao suddenly thought of how Radiant City's imperial palace suddenly became like a stronghold when it came under attack. That transformation could only be achieved with tremendous power, and it had to be supported by an equally vast power. This also meant that there was likely to be another high-energy compression array soul tool inside the imperial palace. Impressive. Sun Moon Empire. Radiant City could truly be described as impregnable with defenses like that. That was especially so if the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was inside Radiant City. This meant that, in this world, only a god would probably have the strength to damage and destroy Radiant City. Huro Yuao couldn't help but think about the god of emotions. Wrong Nyambing. His strength was far from enough. At least, he didn't have enough strength to unleash the Morning Dew Dagger's full potential. Otherwise, how the Princess of the Sea forced him into such a sorry position in the IC? Huro Yuao circled around Radiant City for about a quarter of its circumference before he lay down in the vegetation and continued his investigation. Radiant City's circumstances were almost identical to his speculations, and there was a large soul tool front deployed on every side, each of which drew power from a high-energy compression array soul tool, while there were soul engineers operating it from within. Huro Yuao discovered after several attempts that if he wanted to use his spiritual power to detect the plant's spiritual undulations, his body also had to be in contact with plants. For instance, he would have to lie down in blue silver grass, or in a thicket. He could also lean against a tree trunk. If his body wasn't touching any plants, there was no way he could sense their spiritual undulations. Huro Yuao wasn't in a hurry. At least, the Imperial Soul Engineering Legion wouldn't return tonight without an alarm. Therefore, he still had enough time. He didn't enter Radiant City, instead relying on his spiritual interference domain and imitation as he hid behind a large tree, opened a spectral gate, and returned to his spectral demiplane. Huro Yuao had already informed everyone about the plan, so all 3 Soul Engineer Legions had made their preparations operations did take off inside his spectral demiplane. Huo Yuao immediately called a meeting once he returned, and gathered all the Tang Sect senior members. Huo Yuao didn't tell Bei Bei that he had discovered the Blue Silver Emperor's whereabouts. Now was not the time to tell him about that, because it would affect his mood. Huo Yuao simply told everyone what he had discovered in his surveillance of Radiant City. Everyone's faces turned black as they listened to his description, and that was especially so when they heard Huo Yuao describe the Imperial Soul Engineering Legion. This is more troublesome than we thought, Bei Bei frowned as he spoke. The Sun Moon Empire can't possibly guess our plan, but Radiant City's defenses are probably already at their weakest. This is the Sun Moon Empire's capital, and their defenses are undoubtedly tight and strict. Judging by the current situation, it will be very difficult for us to cause any significant losses to Radiant City. It's hard for us not to be discovered even with your spiritual interference domain, unless we can destroy the aerial surveillance soul tools around Radiant City as soon as possible. But if we do that, the city will be warned. Huo Yuao nodded and said, it is quite difficult to destroy the aerial surveillance soul tools around Radiant City, because there are all linked to a soul tool front beneath them. That enormous soul tool front will attempt to intercept as soon as an attack is discovered. Shu Sanchi said, it is hard for us to succeed with the current situation. Why don't we choose another target? Even if we don't attack Radiant City, I believe that they will bring their armies back as long as we can cause utter chaos within the Sun Moon Empire. Huo Yuao shook his head and said, the Sun Moon Empire is already placing a lot of emphasis on us. The only thing is they don't understand how we operate. This opportunity will only come once in a blue moon, and the Sun Moon Empire will be a lot less mobile without the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion around. The Sun Moon Empire losing their flexibility and mobility gives us a chance to retreat. Therefore, we cannot give up this opportunity, no matter what. We will never know when another opportunity like this will arise again. Bei Bei smiled faintly at Huo Yuao and said, seems like you already have a plan, little junior brother. How do we go about it? Huo Yuao's eyes closed into slits. We have to start from those aerial surveillance soul tools. Aerial surveillance soul tools are very expensive, and destroying one will already give the Sun Moon Empire some heartache. Furthermore, we can only complete our ambush by destroying those aerial surveillance soul tools. My plan is as such. Huo Yuao briefly explained what he was thinking. Everyone nodded as they listened to his description, but Tang Wutong was the only one who frowned. That's too dangerous, Yuao. If you're discovered, you will be immediately attacked by linked soul tools. Even though we all trust in your ability, those linked soul tools' offensive powers are far too strong. Huo Yuao replied, I wouldn't have the confidence before getting Leo as my spirit, because the Sun Moon Empire has advanced their research into spiritual detectors. But fusing with Leo has elevated my spiritual power to a much more intricate level, and I can mask and imitate everything around me more perfectly. This means that the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance soul tools will have a hard time detecting me, while only spiritual detectors can do that in the first place. However, the greatest problem with a spiritual detector is its range. I can tell from the Sun Moon Empire's current deployment of spiritual detectors that their current research product only has a range of about 500 meters. Under such circumstances, I can just do what I need to do high in the sky, and target those aerial surveillance soul tools and ignore the low altitude ones, and they won't discover me. Those aerial surveillance soul tools linking together with the soul tool front on the ground is most effective because there's sufficient space for the soul tool front to intercept any attacks against them. Those low altitude surveillance soul tools are a lot easier to deal with. Everyone nodded continuously as they listened to Huo Yuao's convincing discussion. Tang Wutong was the only one who still had some hesitation in her eyes as she stared at him. All right, since that's the case, it's settled. You have to be careful, Yuao. Nobody can help you on this, and you have to prioritize your safety above everything else. You have to leave as soon as something goes wrong. At most, we'll just abandon this opportunity altogether. Bei Bei reminded Huo Yuao. Huo Yuao nodded. Don't worry, eldest senior brother. I will be as careful as I can. The Sun Moon Empire is too confident in their aerial surveillance soul tools. After this mission, they will realize that we aren't moving quickly from place to place by sea, and they will be confused about our abilities. Since that's the case, we shall give them a good one this time. Tang Wutong arrived beside Huo Yuao and said, let me go with you. We can back each other up if we're together. Huo Yuao shook his head. No, Wutong. It's different this time. I'll be more flexible by myself, and I won't be discovered so easily. With my current spiritual power, it's likely that I won't be discovered even if spiritual detectors sweep over me. But if you're around, the spiritual detectors and oscillation detectors can easily spot you if they sweep over you. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Tang Wutong quietly reached out and pinched his waist as she glared at him threateningly. Huo Yuao's facial muscles twitched. Don't worry, I'll be as careful as I can possibly be. For you. Tang Wutong gently leaned into his arm. I'll be waiting for you. Be careful. Yes. Huo Yuao pulled Hikato with him and went straight over to the warehouses. Bei Bei immediately gathered the 3 Soul Engineer Legions and prepared for battle. He ordered the Heavy Artillery Soul Engineer Legion and the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion over to the warehouses to shift something. The sky had already turned completely dark when Huo Yuao came out of the spectral demiplane an hour later. He gazed at Radiant City in the distance, and he could see light and fire across thousands of homes. He had to concede that this city, which was the largest one on the continent, would leave a very deep impression on anybody coming here for the first time. The city scenes at night were the most beautiful that Huo Yuao had ever seen. Huo Yuao heaved a faint sigh. I'm sorry, Radiant City's peace is destined to be broken tonight. Huo Yuao already had his icy war god's armor on by now. He used his spiritual power to control the dark blue hue so that they didn't shine, and his entire body seemed to disappear into the night sky. Not a single trace of his armor's intense chills was released. Huo Yuao would be extremely careful even without Tang Wutong's reminder. His life and death was linked to the 3 Soul Engineer Legions, because his spectral demiplane was a double-edged sword. If Huo Yuao was alive, everyone inside his spectral demiplane could become an army of ghost soldiers. But if he died, then everyone in the Tang Sect and the 3 Soul Engineer Legions would never leave his spectral demiplane. This wasn't because he didn't want to release everyone before he came out. They were too close to Radiant City, and everyone would be easily discovered if they came outside. Therefore, he had to take this risk. He wasn't taking this risk for himself. He was representing several thousand soul engineers. He was also representing the Douluo continent's last hope. He didn't have a choice not to be careful. With his icy war god's armor, Huo Yuao could vividly feel thick soul power flowing through the armor and entering his body continuously. The armor was almost like part of his skin, and perhaps even part of his skeleton. He didn't feel any discomfort or difference, besides the fact that his entire body became a little fatter. Huo Yuao controlling the icy war god's armor was different from when the Snow Empress was doing it. The reason was because unleashing this human-shaped soul tool's full potential required Huo Yuao's spiritual power. The Snow Empress didn't understand it enough, so she could only use it to amplify her abilities and defend herself. The armor's wings gradually opened behind it. It was a class 9 soul tool, but it was different from Huo Yuao's flying-shaped soul tool. The icy war god's armor didn't consume Huo Yuao's own soul power, so it could take him over 7,000 meters in the air. This fact alone was something that no other soul tool in the world could achieve. There were 2 great dangers at high altitudes: low temperatures and thin air. The icy war god's armor negated the extreme cold effects, and the armor itself could absorb energy from the low temperatures around it and feed that energy back to Huo Yuao. Thin air was fatal to other soul masters, and was a condition they couldn't recover from. But that wasn't a problem for the icy war god's armor. Huo Yuao had already attempted to go beyond 10,000 meters in the sky with this human-shaped soul tool. That was an entirely different world, and he wouldn't fall even if he didn't use any soul power to control himself. He would just be hovering in very thin air, and that feeling was both mystical and frightening at the same time. Huo Yuao didn't know if he was the first human to fly at such a height, but he didn't see any other living beings at that altitude. He tapped his feet against the ground as his wings blasted off. He used his spiritual detection to open a path under the cover of imitation, and surged into the air in the moment when there weren't any surveillance soul tools sweeping his path. The icy war god's armor's energy was all contained inside it, and Huo Yuao didn't have to release any soul power at all for his armor to take him high into the sky. What he needed was to communicate with his armor through his consciousness. Huo Yuao reached 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye. Most low altitude surveillance soul tools were no longer effective at this height, but Huo Yuao was going even higher. 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters, 5,000 meters. He went all the way to 6,000 meters before he controlled his armor to stabilize himself as he hovered in midair. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.